Okay, let's start with a phrase that sounds so simple, but is actually incredibly deep. Bible truths. Right off the bat, it's a statement that promises certainty, doesn't it? But as we're about to see, getting to that certainty is a journey all its own. But what does that really mean? When we hear a phrase like that, what are we actually expecting to find? That's the big question we're diving into today. So first, let's just talk about the promise packed into those two little words. Think about it. It's not called Bible ideas or Bible suggestions. Using the word truths, well, that's a very specific, very powerful choice. It suggests something rock solid, something that doesn't change, something absolute. It's a promise of clarity in what can be a really confusing world. It makes us feel like we can find a final, clear answer to some of life's biggest questions, all wrapped up in one book. So, just for a second, what do you expect to find when you hear that? A set of rules to live by? A history book? A step-by-step guide for life? I think for most of us, the expectation is that the path to understanding will be pretty straightforward. But, as you're about to see, the journey is often way more complex than the destination we have in our heads. And that brings us right here to what I like to call the interpretation maze. Because while we might be looking for a straight line to the truth, what we usually find is this fascinating and, yeah, kind of tricky maze. Trying to nail down one single, universal truth that everybody agrees on from the Bible, well, it's a seriously complex journey. It's just not as simple as reading a line and instantly knowing its one true meaning. So, why is that? Well, this slide really breaks it down. First, you're dealing with ancient languages, Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, where a single word can have a whole bunch of different meanings. Then you've got these massive historical and cultural gaps. I mean, the world they lived in back then was so different from ours today. And the Bible isn't one book. It's more like a library with all these diverse literary styles. You just can't read a poetic psalm the same way you read a legal code in Leviticus. And on top of all that, you have layers of translation from the original language to another and then maybe to the English we read today. Plus, we're always trying to figure out the original authorial intent. What did the writer actually mean for their audience thousands of years ago? Every single one of these things is another twist and turn in the maze. And believe it or not, there's a whole academic field dedicated to this stuff. It's called hermeneutics. It's the formal discipline of how to interpret these texts. The fact that this field even exists kind of tells you everything you need to know about how serious and challenging this whole process is. Okay, so we've talked about how complex the text itself is, but there's another huge variable in this equation, and that's us, the reader. And this is where we go from one single text to, well, many, many voices. This is such a great way to think about it, the great multiplier. You start with one source, right? The biblical texts. But every single person, every community, every generation that reads it brings their own unique context to the table. Think about a simple verse like, love your neighbor. To one person, that's about donating to a food bank. To another, it's a call to dismantle unjust social systems. See? One source, but it generates this huge spectrum of different truths. And this quote from Anis Nin just hits the nail on the head. We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. We can't help but read scripture through the lens of our own life experiences, our culture, our traditions. That lens totally shapes what we see. It doesn't mean finding truth is impossible, not at all, but it does mean that our own perspective is always, always part of the equation. So where does all of this leave us? It leads us to our final section and a chance to maybe reframe this whole conversation. If finding one single static truth is so complicated, then what's the point of searching at all? Well, let's look at a shift in perspective. So what if the goal isn't to arrive at a static checklist of facts, like looking something up in an encyclopedia? What if the real point is to engage in a living, dynamic dialogue with the text, to wrestle with it, to ask it tough questions, and to let it ask tough questions of us? And that brings us to what might be the core takeaway here. The process itself, the searching, the questioning, the journey through that maze can be just as meaningful and life-changing as finding any single final answer. The value isn't just in arriving at the destination, it's in everything we discover along the way. So we end up kind of back where we started, but maybe with a new way of looking at it. I'll leave you with this to chew on. Is truth a fixed place you finally arrive at? Or is it the very path you walk while you're seeking it? Something to think about.